I stared out the window of my dad's car as we drove home from my counseling. I hated that my therapist was good at her job, but it ultimately made life better. My dad had put me in therapy to help me get over the trauma my mom inflicted. She was delusional, off her meds, and threatened to kill us all. She did kill my sister to spite my dad, and something had snapped in him. When I called the police, my dad had beaten her so hard that she would be in debt and in a mental hospital for the rest of her life. I shook those thoughts out of my head as we pulled into the driveway. My dad looked over at me and said, "Hey, silence has been noted, Travis. Was therapy okay today?" I replied, "Yeah." He started to get out of the car and said, "Well, after we eat dinner, you and Lacey have to sit down and play some Halo." I followed him to the door and asked, "That eager to get your butt kicked, Dad?" I was finishing up with my homework for the evening when I felt someone watching me. I looked out my window to see a jogger going about her way. Something about the blonde woman seemed familiar, but I shook it off and got back to studying for my AP classes. As I got back to my work, Lacey, my dad's new wife, knocked on my open door and said, "Hey, dinner's ready, okay? Be down in a minute," I replied as I saved my online worksheets and paused my music. As we were eating, I was impressed at how well my dad was doing. Today was the 4-year anniversary of my sister's death. She wasn't related to me by blood, but she might as well been. I kinda felt bad for him. His first wife had died about a year after their daughter was born. He married my mom 3 years after that, and well, she was my mom. Seeing what she had been like and how she abused us all for the first 12 years of my life had a big impact on me. A bad one. I realized I was starting to slip off and silently took a few calming breaths to avoid a flashback. As we finished up dinner, my dad booted up his old Xbox 360 when the power cut out. He and Lacey walked up to the window and he said, "Huh, that's weird. Neighbors still got power. Must be the fuse box. Hey Trav, go grab the flashlight for me. It's under your bed, right?" I asked as I headed for the stairs. "Yeah," he called after me. I got to the room and started fumbling under the bed. I felt the box my dad kept his revolver in and reached a little deeper, praying I didn't accidentally grab a dildo until I pulled out the flashlight. As I walked out of the room, I heard a loud smash and Lacey cry out, followed by a woman screaming, "Replaced me so soon, Keith?" I practically jumped down the stairs, turning on the light only to see the blonde jogger charge my dad with a knife, covered in blood. I froze for a moment as he smacked the knife out of her hand and they started grappling. It couldn't be. It was her. She had complete facial reconstruction surgery, but it was my mother. My dad threw her off his back and turned to me, yelling, "Travis, my gun." I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't waste my time opening the door, barging through it and falling down. I scrambled to the bed and dug until I reached the Nike shoe box the gun was in. I checked to make sure it was loaded. It was. As I turned off the safety and ran back down the stairs, I heard the breaking off glass. I reached the bottom of the stairs just in time to see my dad get stabbed with a shard of glass. He grunted and fell down. My mother dropped the glass and smiled, saying, "Oh Travis, I've missed you so much, baby." I looked past the tears in my eyes and in one fluid motion, raised the revolver and shot her in the chest. Blood bubbled from my mother's mouth as she lay on the ground. I was sobbing now, in a full panic attack. My mother started laughing and said, "You should just turn the gun on yourself, because mommy will always be here. And if I'm not, I'll always come for you." As she spoke, I filled with rage. How dare she? How dare I not end it? I should have done it then. I'll do it now. I stood up, every part of me trembling, and walked over to her. She seemed taken aback by my actions and said, "Sweetie, what are you doing?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I just breathed deeply and let out a scream announcing my anger to the world. I pulled the trigger again. Then I ran outside and called for help. That was 4 hours ago. I'm at a police station now. I don't know how anything is going for my dad or Lacey. What I do know is that detectives are grilling the fuck out of me. They haven't taken my phone, thankfully, but the detectives didn't find our body. It makes no sense. 3 of my neighbors saw the body. I shot her in the fucking head. Not one human being can survive a .357 slug at point blank. But the body is gone, and everyone is perplexed. But I think the detectives are coming back in. I'll try to keep you guys posted. Hey y'all, sorry for the space between updates. After I chronicled Detective C's escape from the police station with me, we have driven all the way to Topeka, Kansas. It's been a long ride, but the detective I'm with is hellbent on solving this case. I hate the fact that he's dragged me along, but apparently my hometown has fallen to shit after the police station was massacred. So I guess being in Kansas to track down my mom's actual corpse is better than being in Anarchyville. I'm just grateful that I buttered Detective C into buying me a phone charger so I can type this up. We pulled into a driveway in a nice neighborhood at about 4 a.m. Detective C said, "Wait here, I need to get us an actual bed to sleep on." He walked up and knocked on the door. Almost instantly the door opened. A gun was in his face, he seemed unfazed by it. After a few tense moments of me watching Detective C and the person holding the gun talk, the hand lowered, and Detective C walked back to the car. "Help me grab our stuff," he told me. I grabbed his bag of riot gear, and he grabbed his M4. I walked up the walkway and into the house. I set the bag down in front of the couch when I felt the cold barrel of a gun pressed into the back of my head. I stayed crouched over, contemplating grabbing the nightstick that was in the bag when I heard a female voice say, "You didn't tell me there was someone else with you, Dan." Detective C, or Dan I guess, looked over at the woman and said, "The hell did you think I meant when I said key evidence, Linda?" "I don't know, evidence is a weird way to describe a person, Dan. Almost like you knew I wouldn't let you in if you had another person with you," she replied. Detective C said, "Well, if you shoot the kid you're letting the deaths of a lot of your old co-workers go unpunished. Coleman's dead, Trelawney was in the station, he probably got wiped out with the rest of them. The chief's dead too. You killed that kid, the key to who killed everyone you ran from is gone." I felt her press the gun harder into my head. I decided if this nut was gonna kill me I would go out fighting. I grabbed the nightstick and ducked while spinning. I was trying to hit her head, but I wound up smacking her gun instead. I went flying across the room. I was scared shitless that some boomer named Linda was gonna kill me, but I raised the nightclub and said, "Let's just talk like people, man." I'm pretty sure she saw me shaking. Linda, who looked to be about 35, laughed and said, "You've got balls. Tell you what, you tell me what's so important that I have to tolerate a crazy ex and some twiggy teen in my house, and maybe I'll let you guys leave." My bravado died in that moment. She was completely unfazed by the fact I had a weapon. I had to make sure I didn't stutter as I said, "Well, 3 days ago my mom, who had been locked in a mental asylum in this town, broke into my house and tried to kill everyone there." "So?" Linda interjected. "Wait, that's not all. When Detective C and his partner took me in for questioning, she broke in there and massacred the police station." I nervously said. "Sounds like your city's problem." Linda said nonchalantly. Detective C spoke before I could and said, "The kid shot her point blank in the head with a .357 Magnum. You worked forensics before investigative journalism, does anyone survive that?" Weirder still, the mental asylum she was held at proclaimed her legally dead 3 days before she came to the kid's house. She looked interested now as she said, "No, maybe you boys are mistaken. What's in it for me if I help you?" Detective C quickly replied, "There's obviously a cover-up happening. Back where we came from is suddenly filled to the brim with military. No one is mentioning the police station. You help us and we hand over all rights to the case. This is a big one, I know you want in on it, Linda." She replied, "Sure then. But in 3 days, regardless if you get what you want, you two are gonna be getting the hell out of my house. Deal?" Detective C replied. Linda led us down to her basement. It looked like a raccoon's den met a hacker's lair. I was awed at the amount of Mountain Dew this woman could drink and the $30,000 worth of tech she had. She looked at me and asked, "Well, ballsy, what's your mom's name?" It took me a moment to register that she was talking to me as I said, "Marion Gawley." She sat down in a gaming chair and said, "Well, Dan, I'll dig some stuff up on her, you two go get some rest, one you gets the couch, one of you gets the chair." We went up the stairs and I asked, Detective C, "Can I just call you Dan?" He sighed and said, "Sure kid. We've sat in a car together for 3 days, I guess that's long enough for a first name basis. You get the chair though." I'm stretching out on the couch. We settled down and I feel asleep. I checked my phone when I woke up. It was 10:30. I stretched and closed my eyes, and had a granola bar thrown at my head. "Get downstairs," Linda said. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and got up. As I walked down the stairs I overheard Dan and Linda speaking. "So you're gonna use family visitation rights to get in?" Linda asked. "Yeah, we're gonna need bugs and micro cameras to catch everything though. Can you hook us up?" Dan replied. "What are we doing?" I asked, coming down the stairs. "I'm pretty sure you heard both of us," Linda said. I nodded and Dan said, "We're going at noon. Your grandparents haven't claimed your mother's body yet, so we're gonna try to at least see it." After we had gotten prepped and wired up, we drove to the asylum. I was silent as we drive there. I still hadn't processed the events of the last week. When we got there, Dan turned to me and said, "Okay kid, act like a morning sun. Don't let on to anything, or give any hints as to what happened at home. The mental health system in America is pretty terrible, so no one is going to know unless we tell them. Alright, I replied. I was nervous, and he could probably tell it. I took a few deep breaths before we got out of the car. The plan was to plant about 4 bugs in the asylum, as far as we could get in. The deeper we go the better. I walked up to the receptionist desk and said, "Hello, I've come to visit my mother." The man behind the desk didn't look away from his computer as he asked, "Name?" "Travis Gully," I replied. "No, the patient you're visiting," he said tiredly. "Oh, Marion Gully," I said. He finally turned from his computer and asked, "You know she's dead, right son?" I replied instantly, "Yeah, I know." The receptionist shook his head and put 2 visitors stickers. I carefully put one of my bugs under the counter as I picked them up and he said, "Go down the doors to your left and take the 3rd door to right to the morgue." We nodded and walked down it. Dan looked at the first door to the right in the hallway and said, "I'm gonna check out this hall. Catch you at the morgue." I nodded and kept walking. The hall was stupidly long. After 10 minutes of walking I could see the 3rd set of doors. I was about to go through them when I heard someone jogging behind me. I whirled around, ready for some guard to be chasing me out. It was just Dan. I sighed in relief and carefully placed another bug on the door frame as I asked, "Find the bathroom?" "Sure did find the shitter," Dan replied. I nearly chuckled, but the door suddenly opened and a woman harshly asked, "Just what are you two doing out here?" I nearly jumped in surprise and replied quickly, "We're here to visit a Marion Gully." The doctor looked shocked for a moment before saying, "Well, I'll have you 2 clowns know she's not here." Dan arched an eyebrow and asked, "Really?" "Because we checked funeral home records as we drove 4 states over." "Can you tell us what home she's at? Her boy would like to pay his respects." She looked like a deer caught in headlights. She took a moment to think and said, "No, I cannot disclose that information. Please leave, or I'll have to call security." Dan was about to talk when she closed the doors and reached for a walkie-talkie. As me and Dan observed her through the wired glass, he said, "Let's get out of here, our work's done." I still had 2 bugs, but I decided to take his advice. It didn't take too long to get out of there. We heard security behind us as we closed the doors to the reception room. As we walked out to the parking lot, Dan stopped me and asked, "Hey kid, see the trash in my car?" "So what? We need to go." I quickly replied, "It's been moved. I bet you $100 we've been bugged. Don't say a damn thing about what we're actually doing." He said, "Oh." I replied, mildly surprised. "We're in the car now. Something's wrong with the asylum, I know it. But we also have a tail. Someone has followed us all the way across town. I'll update you guys soon." When I first walked into the room, the scrawny kid with long hair and baggy clothes didn't seem like much. He still didn't seem like much, but the facts were that his stepmom was dead, and his dad lay in critical condition. Luckily for the kid, there was evidence that he was telling the truth. I downed my 5th coffee and readied myself to go and tell the kid the merry news. We had just wasted 4 hours grilling this kid and his neighbors about a disappearing corpse. None of this case made sense. The kid claimed his mother, who was locked in a mental asylum for the murder of her stepdaughter until her death 3 days ago. Her real body was at a morgue. So who the hell did this kid shoot? I stopped going down the rabbit hole of these unanswerable questions when my partner, Coleman, came in and said, "Hey Dan, we've got the go-ahead to tell the kid about his dad. By the way, how do you say your last name?" I didn't feel like explaining Gaelic, Coir Loy Sawar to be exact. So I just said, "I don't know Coleman. I'll tell the kid, you get the go-ahead to release him." "You got it man," he said as he turned and left. I walked into the interrogation room as the kid was putting away his phone. I said, "Well Travis, there's good news, but there's bad news. Your dad's no longer in critical condition, and he might wake up soon, however the blood loss might push him into a coma. My partner is getting the okay and you're going home. The bad news is that your stepmom is dead. So is your mother. She died 3 days ago." Travis looked visibly confused. He asked, "Who else could it be? How would someone else know those details?" "I don't know, elsewise my job would be a lot easier kid," I replied. I was about to turn and leave when the lights cut out. I listened for the hum of the AC. The air was hooked up to a separate generator, yet that separate system was down too. It was dead silent. I cautiously pulled out my flashlight when I heard a scream. It was blood-curdling, and I flinched. I looked back at the kid and said, "Stay here, don't get hurt." He silently nodded and then I said, "I'm locking the door, so ignore what I just said. I'll be back." I walked out the door and locked it behind me. I lifted the flashlight and started walking down the hall. There was a sound of wind, like a faint cry out from across the building. All of my hair stood on end, as I kept walking forward. I reached the end of the hall and turned left into the rec room. I kicked something soft. I looked down and jumped back. It was Coleman. He had been stabbed in the back. I would have puked, but his death was easy. But if no one had noticed, whoever had done that was still out there. I drew my gun and turned my flashlight off. I stayed still and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. It was about 1 a.m., and with the lights out and a killer on the loose I would need to make my way to the locker room. Then I could make my way to the chief's office and wrangle up any survivors. As I got the ability to see again, I got low and picked up Coleman's gun. I would feel more comfortable with my revolver, but more shots were better in this case, and I had 18 rounds before an empty gun. I started walking as silently as possible. I walked into another off hallway. This hallway would lead me to the left wing offices. Then I had to cross the main hall and go through the right wing offices to the locker room. Then I had to go back through to the main hall and through the central offices. I passed by one of the first offices in the left wing when I heard footsteps. I rushed into the open door and closed it behind me. I crawled to the desk, and crouched down behind the desk. The wall across from me had a vent on it. The footsteps rushed past, followed by shuffling. It stopped by my door, and I held my breath until it went forward again. I crawled over and pulled the cover off. I could fit in the vents, hopefully whoever was out there couldn't. Another scream rang out as someone else was caught. The shuffling was returning as I pulled the vent cover back on. I started crawling through, and was 3 feet away when the door opened. A soft, but cold voice called out, "Travis? Mommy's here." My blood went cold. No fucking way, the kid's mom was dead. She started to turn around. I slapped the wall of the vent and she turned around. I started crawling as fast as I could. She walked up to the wall and called out, "Travis." Then I heard her yank the vent cover off. I passed by a vent cover that led outside. The street lights were still on, and it didn't seem like anyone knew what was going on. I passed by another vent cover as I heard her crawling behind me. I kicked out the cover and crawled out. I was in the main hall, near the staircase. I saw a shoe on the ground, and I picked it up. I walked up the stairs and crouched down behind a banister. A woman emerged out of the vents a moment later. In the dim light I saw that she matched the description Travis gave of her, down to the clothing. I threw the shoe towards the right wing, and it smacked the doors. She smiled maniacally and ran through the doors. I walked the rest of the way up the stairs to the second story. I walked through the doors to the second story's right wing. The windows revealed a horror show. A window was broken, like the woman leapt through it. People lay dead everywhere. I looked closer and saw that many people had been stabbed like Coleman had been, but a lot of people had been shot. I walked over to the broken window, and saw no one below. I turned and walked further into the right wing. On the last room there was a hatch to the locker room. I started speed walking and tried not to think about Coleman. He was green, but he was also a person. No person deserved that. I was almost to the last room when I heard a shuffle. I spun around and raised Coleman's gun. A fat guy, who I vaguely remembered as an operator, raised his hands. I said in a harsh whisper, "If that wasn't me, you'd be dead." He muttered, "Ugh, yeah." Then I asked, "Are there any other survivors?" The guy stuttered out, "And no. Some lunatic lobbed gas up here and the people started shooting. There was someone else too, who went around and killed the survivors. I hid in this maintenance closet built into the wall behind us." Then he asked, "Do you know what's going on here?" I started walking and said, "Yes and no. It's related to this kid we brought in for questioning. Travis Gawley. I think you took his call." He replied, "Yeah, I did." So his mom, who was shot but disappeared, is out looking for him. She's in the right wing below us right now. I'm going to the locker room and getting some heavy firepower. Night vision, ARs and some body armor. Maybe even a riot kit. Then I'm collecting the kid and we're getting out of here." The guy said confusedly, "We're?" I retorted, "Yeah, seeing as how this lady took out the whole damn station in less than an hour, I figured no man left behind was the best policy. What's your name?" "I'm Will," he replied. I opened the door to the last office and said, "Well, Will, under the desk in here is a hatch straight into the locker room. We need to move this desk as quietly as possible." Then I heard something fall over across the wing. I closed the door and said, "Fast like." We lifted the desk and set it down quietly as the footsteps drew nearer. The desk wasn't too far away, but the hatch was revealed. I opened it and gestured to Will for him to go first. It took him a moment to shimmy through, and he let out a slight grunt when he missed the pull-out stepladder and fell, but I didn't think she had noticed. I slipped through the hatch and closed it slowly as she worked the door open. As soon as I touched the ground, I signaled for Will to be quiet and started getting the gear we needed. I thought we were safe as I got a duffel bag, 2 sets of night vision goggles. I was working on the guns when Will knocked something over. Something was still meandering in the room above, but shuffling approached us from the hall. He cursed and picked it up, but the blonde woman was at the door. "I hunger," she cried. Will muttered something about being stereotypical as I checked to make sure the MP5 I had was loaded. I told Will, "Grab a riot shield and a nightstick. If something is upstairs we have to assume there's a lot of them, and need to take her out silently." "Okay," Will replied. He picked the stuff up and I counted down from 3. On 1 I opened the door. Will smacked her knees from behind the riot shield and started bashing her head in. Not before she could make a violent hissing sound, however. I put it off, found a silencer and picked myself out a shield. Me and Will made it through the right wing and back to the main hall, just as a group of the exact same blonde woman Will had just killed also made it into the hall from upstairs. It was like they were clones. They looked on at us silently for a moment, until I raised my gun and started shooting. Out of a group of 15 only 4 remained. Then there was a hissing sound and the room got foggy. I wasn't at the station anymore. I was on a familiar rooftop. A figure loomed at the edge chanting, "In our name, in our name, in our name." I turned around and was smacked back into the station as one of the women tackled me. The riot shield was the only thing that saved my life. She scrabbled against it as I reached for my gun. After a moment of struggling I shot. Will was swinging at nothing. I started to slip back into the hallucination when I heard Will scream. The last 3 had ganged up on Will. I shot one, but then realized if I stayed much longer I would meet the same fate. I sprinted back down the left wing, shooting another one of Travis's friends. I rushed to his room and pulled him out. We got out through the vents. I swear I saw more of them. It feels like I'm losing my mind. We're heading to a secure place right now. But Travis insists on writing down every word I say as we go there. Like posting on social media will help.